The lead crystal flute shuddered violently in Alara's hand, a physical echo of the internal tremor caused by her rival's laughter, sharp, privileged, and as cuttingly cruel as the sound of ice shattering across the Gala's polite, curated murmur. Tears, darling, how utterly pedestrian, Serafina murmured, her voice a low, honeyed venom, a caress meant only to wound. William needs a diamond, not a wilting flower. Alara stood there, feeling less like a woman and more like a ghost inhabiting a borrowed navy silk dress, her entire world collapsing into dust in the most public, glittering way imaginable. She was just a simple artist, the wife William had already forgotten. But what Serafina Dubois and the cheating man who was still legally Alara's husband didn't know was that the blood running through Era Blackwood's veins was older than the very granite foundations of this city, and infinitely more valuable than their fleeting, desperate ambition. They were about to learn that mocking a Blackwood was a catastrophic mistake, one that could never be erased or undone. The first sign of the affair hadn't been a dramatic confrontation or a carelessly misplaced hotel receipt. It had been silent, a gradual, terrifying withdrawal. It was the way William Vance, her husband of 5 years, had begun looking through her. His ambitious eyes focused intently on a distant, dazzling horizon she was no longer invited to share. He would come home late from Vance Innovations, his struggling tech startup, smelling of a perfume she didn't own. It was a sharp, aggressive scent, sandalwood and night-blooming jasmine. A scent that fought, a scent that was nothing like her own quiet essence of soft vanilla and soothing lavender. Era had desperately tried to intellectualize it, forcing herself to believe it was just the stress. William had staked everything, their savings, their modest Brooklyn brownstone, their future, on the outcome of the upcoming Starlight Foundation Gala. It was his grand stage, his one shot to court the major investors necessary to keep his company from imploding under the weight of its own debt. He had told her, with a strange, forced smile, that their entire future rested on the success of that one night. I need you there on my arm, the perfect, supportive wife. Just for a few hours, Ellie, he'd pleaded. Smile, look pretty, and let me handle the rest. She had agreed because she always had. Alara was an artist, a watercolorist whose soul found expression in gentle, ephemeral hues and delicate, forgotten landscapes. She saw the world in soft shades of gray, not in the stark, blinding black and white of betrayal. She had willingly retreated from her own prodigious talent, deliberately subsuming her identity to become merely Mrs. Vance. She managed their brownstone, nurtured a rooftop garden that served as her only private sanctuary, and provided the quiet, unbreakable foundation upon which William built his frantic, flimsy ambitions. Her own family, the Blackwoods, had been profoundly skeptical of the marriage. He doesn't see you, Lara. Her older brother, Marcus, had warned, his voice low and firm, possessing the immovable quality of the granite on his boardroom table. He sees a comfortable idea. Her father, Alistar Blackwood, a man whose name was whispered with a blend of reverence and fear in circles of old money and silent power, had simply looked at her with knowing, time-eaten eyes. Remember who you are, he had said, even when you let someone else name you. She had dismissed their concerns as the typical overprotectiveness of a dynasty that couldn't possibly understand her deep yearning for a simple, normal life. She had wanted love, not a legacy. She had chosen William precisely because he had no idea she was a Blackwood. To him, she was Era, an orphan with a small trust fund and a respectable talent for painting. It was a lie of deliberate omission. She had cultivated a secret garden where she hoped to be loved for herself alone. Now, the fragile walls of that garden were crumbling fast. On the day of the gala, the lie became physically unbearable. While retrieving William's tuxedo from the dry cleaner, a small velvet box had slipped from his coat pocket. It wasn't the cheap paper box of a trinket. It was the unmistakable signature case from Cartier. Her heart didn't just beat. It hammered, a trapped bird struggling against her ribs, as she lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on black silk, was a diamond necklace. A cascade of fire and ice, so brilliant it literally hurt her eyes to look at it directly. It was not for her. Her birthday had passed 2 months ago. Their anniversary was in the spring. This was a gift for someone else. That evening, as she fastened the simple pearl earrings her mother had left her, a quiet legacy against the backdrop of her husband's monstrous lie, she saw the final confirmation. William's phone was left carelessly on the dresser. A text message glowed on the screen, sent by a Serafina. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I'll be wearing your gift. Let's show them all what power looks like. JNS forever." The breath simply departed her body in a ragged, silent scream. The room spun on its axis. JNS. William and Serafina. It was horrifyingly real. The scent of aggressive perfume, the late nights, the deepening hollow space in their bed. It all crashed down on her in a single, devastating wave. He wasn't just cheating. He was building a new life, a new brand, a new couple, right under her innocent nose. And tonight, he was going to parade her, his oblivious wife, into the very same room as his mistress. The ensuing humiliation was a deliberate, perfectly calculated cruelty. "Ellie, are you ready?" William called from downstairs, his voice layered with nauseating, false cheer. She looked at her reflection. A pale, defeated woman with wide, haunted eyes stared back. The borrowed gown, a simple navy silk sheath, felt cheap and utterly ill-fitting, like a pathetic costume. For a fleeting moment, she considered shattering the mirror, running, or calling her father to let the Blackwood Empire obliterate this small, pathetic man. But a different, cold kind of resolve settled in her chest, heavy and hard as a river stone. No, she would not run. She would go to the gala. She would wear the name Vance one last time and watch him perform his final act. She would see with her own eyes the woman for whom he had traded his soul and his honor. The Starlight Foundation Gala was held at Cipriani on Wall Street, a cathedral of capitalism whose soaring, classical marble columns and impossibly high frescoed ceilings were designed specifically to make lesser mortals feel small and utterly insignificant. The air thrummed with the low, continuous buzz of 1,000 calculated conversations, the clinking of baccarat crystal, and the pervasive scent of money, an intoxicating perfume of naked ambition and expensive cologne. Alara felt William's hand settle proprietarily on the small of her back, a gesture that now felt less like support and more like a brand of ownership. He guided her through the throng, his face plastered with a charming, confident smile that never quite reached the hardness in his eyes. He was a master performer. "Darling, there's Arthur Harrison from the Harrison Group. I need 5 minutes with him. Just look lovely, won't you?" He squeezed her arm, a gesture of command thinly disguised as affection, before abandoning her near a towering, ridiculously ornate floral arrangement. Left alone, Alara instantly became invisible. She was an incompatible mixture, oil in this vast, shimmering sea of champagne. Women in haute couture gowns, dripping with diamonds that weighed more than her entire life savings, appraised her simple dress with quick, dismissive glances. Men in bespoke tuxedos looked directly past her, their eyes scanning the room for bigger players, more important connections. She was merely an accessory, and her owner had just temporarily set her down. And then she saw her. Serafina Dubois was not a woman who entered a room. She conquered it. She was a vision in crimson, a bespoke Alexander McQueen gown that seemed molded to her statuesque predatory frame. Her hair was a sleek, sculpted black sheet, and around her neck, blazing like a constellation of freshly captured stars, was the Cartier necklace. It was a magnificent, brazen declaration of war, worn as jewelry. She wasn't alone. She was flanked by a coterie of admirers, all laughing uproariously at something she had just said, her throaty voice carrying with easy confidence across the ballroom. William, who had just concluded his talk with Mr. Harrison, was drawn to her like a moth to a raging, dangerous fire. Alara watched, a cold, clinical detachment settling over her, as her husband approached this other woman. He didn't touch her. Not yet. But the way he looked at her was an intimacy far more profound than any kiss. He leaned in, whispering something into her ear, and Serafina's responding laugh was throaty, triumphant, and absolutely proprietary. They were a breathtaking, awful tableau of power, beauty, an open betrayal. And everyone was watching. Whispers followed in their wake. That's William Vance. His startup is the next big thing. And that's Serafina Dubois. Her father owns half of the city's media outlets. Era hadn't known that crucial detail. William hadn't just found a mistress. He had found an upgrade, a strategic alliance, a golden ladder. Era felt a familiar, hot sting behind her eyes and quickly retreated toward the shadowed terrace, desperate for air that wasn't thick with hypocrisy and expensive lies. The cool night air hit her face, but it did nothing to cool the burning, acidic shame churning in her gut. She had been so utterly naive. She had believed in their quiet life, in the sincere promises he'd made in their small Brooklyn kitchen. It had all been a performance. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a placeholder until a better offer came along. A single tear escaped and traced a cold, painful path down her cheek. She hastily wiped it away, but it was too late. A shadow fell over her. Well, look what we have here. Serafina stood at the entrance to the terrace, a flute of champagne held carelessly in her hand. The massive diamonds at her throat seemed to actively mock Era's lone, delicate pearl earrings. The triumphant smile on Serafina's face was sharp and predatory. Hiding out here all alone? Don't you know the help is supposed to use the back entrance? Serafina's eyes raked over Alara's simple dress, her lack of significant jewelry, her tear-streaked face. The disdain radiating from her was palpable, almost a physical force. Era stood frozen, her voice caught and strangled in her throat. This was the woman who wore her husband's future and his affection like a gleaming, undeniable trophy. Let me give you a piece of advice, Serafina continued, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, venomous whisper. Men like William, they don't want a watercolor. They want an oil painting. Bold, expensive, something they can show off and leverage. You Ellie are beige. A lovely, comforting, utterly forgettable shade of beige. She took a delicate, slow sip of her champagne, her eyes never leaving Alara's. He's going to be a titan of industry. He needs a tigress by his side, not a, what is it you do? Dabble with paints in a dusty little apartment? Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, striking at the very core of Era's deepest insecurities. She had made herself small for William, believing it was love, and now this woman was mocking her for her sacrifice. The tears she had been fighting so hard to suppress began to well up, blurring the glittering, indifferent lights of the city skyline behind Serafina's crimson silhouette. She hated herself for her weakness, for letting this woman witness her despair. Tears, darling. Serafina's loud, devastating laugh was the final blow. How utterly pedestrian. You should really go home. This is a party for winners. You're just reminding everyone of his humble beginnings. With a final, dismissive flick of her wrist, Serafina turned and walked back into the warmth and blinding light of the gala, leaving Alara alone in the cold. Her quiet, carefully constructed world had not just cracked. It was utterly and completely shattered. For a long, paralyzing moment, Alara simply stood there, the cold marble of the balustrade seeping into her trembling palms. Serafina's words echoed in the silence. Asterisk beige, forgettable, humble beginnings. Asterisk she wasn't just a cheated-on wife. In their eyes, she was a true anchor, a crippling liability William was desperate to cut loose. The tears flowed freely now, hot tracks of humiliation searing her frozen cheeks. It wasn't just the pain of betrayal. It was the sharp sting of being so thoroughly misjudged, so profoundly underestimated. She had spent 5 years dimming her own inherent light so William could shine brighter, believing it was an act of devoted love. Now she saw it clearly for what it was, a fool's sacrifice. Her hand trembled as she reached into her small clutch for her phone. Her thumb hovered over her father's name, Alistar Blackwood. One call to him, one single syllable of command, and William Vance's pathetic world would be reduced to ash before the night was through. Her father commanded global empires with quiet authority. He could crush William's startup, ruin Serafina's media mogul father, and erase them both from the social register with the cold, quiet efficiency of a winter frost. But that felt too easy. It would be her father's victory, not hers. It would be the act of a scared little girl running back to her daddy. The woman Serafina had just mocked would be replaced by the powerful daughter of Alistar Blackwood. But Alara herself would remain a passive spectator in her own life. No, she needed her family, but not as a blunt instrument of revenge. She needed them as witnesses. She needed them to stand with her as she publicly reclaimed herself. Her thumb moved down the contact list and pressed on Liam. Liam Blackwood, her youngest brother, was the family's public face. A brilliant litigator, impossibly charismatic, with a devastating smile that could charm a jury and eyes that could see straight through any lie. He was the velvet glove on the family's unforgiving iron fist. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and instantly concerned. "Era? It's past midnight in London. Is everything all right?" "No, Liam. It's not," she said, her voice husky and brittle from unshed sobs. "Nothing is all right." She didn't need to explain the whole story. The Blackwoods communicated in the unspoken, charged spaces between words. She just had to give him the precise coordinates of her pain. "I'm at the Starlight Foundation Gala at Cipriani on Wall Street." She took a shaky, fortifying breath, the resolve in her voice hardening like newly poured concrete. "William is here with another woman." There was a measurable pause on the other end of the line, but it wasn't a silence of surprise or disbelief. It was the absolute silence of a predator catching a definitive scent. "I see," Liam said, his voice instantly losing its warmth and taking on a dangerous, calculating edge. "Marcus and father are with me. We just concluded our business with the Sterling Consortium." Era's heart gave a fierce, desperate lurch. They were all in London together. It was a stroke of impossible luck, or perhaps fate finally intervening. "Liam," she said, her voice dropping low, mirroring his own sudden intensity. "He's about to give a speech. He's trying to secure final round funding from Arthur Harrison and a few others. His whole future, everything he's built on my silence, is riding on this night." Another pause, shorter this time. She could almost hear the gears turning in his brilliant legal mind, the immediate calculations being made. "And the woman?" "Serafina Dubois, daughter of Robin Dubois, DMN Media." Era supplied the name, tasting like ash in her mouth. "Understood," Liam said. There was the faint sound of muffled, urgent conversation in the background. Then his voice was back, crisp and decisively commanding. "The Blackwood jet is on the tarmac at Heathrow. We can be in New York in under 6 hours. Can you hold on for that long, Ellie?" 6 hours. Felt like an eternity. But the thought of her family crossing the entire Atlantic Ocean for her, of the terrifying, elegant storm that was about to break upon this glittering, self-absorbed world, was an immediate lifeline. "What are you going to do?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. They weren't coming for a quiet word. The Blackwoods did not do subtle. "We are coming to pick you up, sister." Liam's voice was grimly reassuring. "And to remind a few people about the consequences of breaking a contract, a marriage contract in this case. Just stay strong. Don't let them see you fall. We're on our way." He hung up. Era stared at her phone, the screen dark. 6 hours. She pushed herself off the cold balustrade, her spine straightening, reclaiming the posture she'd abandoned years ago. She walked back toward the ballroom doors, her steps no longer hesitant or defeated. She was no longer just the crying wife on the balcony. She was a ticking clock. She re-entered the ballroom and found a small, empty table tucked into a dimly lit corner, a perfect vantage point from which to watch the proceedings. She ordered a glass of water and sipped it slowly, her eyes fixed on William, who was now standing near the main stage, laughing easily with Serafina and schmoozing expertly with potential investors. He looked confident, radiant, a man on the cusp of his own coronation. He had no idea that a transatlantic storm was rapidly gathering, and he was currently standing at its absolute epicenter. The tears were gone, replaced by an icy, focused calm. The prey had stopped running. She was now simply waiting for her pack to arrive. The next few hours unfolded in a surreal, slow-motion ballet of deceit. Era watched from her shadowy corner as William worked the room. He was magnetic, his passion for advanced innovations infectious. He spoke of disruptive algorithms and market expansion, of a future he was single-handedly building. Investors who had been on the fence, men like the stern Arthur Harrison, began to thaw, nodding along, their faces showing flickers of genuine, monetary interest. Serafina was his perfect, dazzling partner in this elaborate charade. She would drift into a conversation, place a perfectly manicured hand on an investor's arm, and murmur, "William is simply a genius. Getting in on the ground floor of Vance Innovations isn't just an investment. It's a legacy." She was selling them as a package deal, a power couple in the making. At one point, William's eyes found Era in her corner. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. A silent, telepathic command for her to either participate or disappear. She met his gaze without flinching, her expression utterly unreadable. He looked away first, turning back toward the warmth and light of his new circle. He had dismissed her entirely. To him, she was merely a problem to be dealt with after the contracts were signed. Finally, the gala's host, a local news anchor with surgically tightened skin, took the stage. And now, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce a man whose vision is set to reshape the future of data analytics. Please give a warm welcome to the founder and CEO of Vance Innovations, Mr. William Vance. A polite, then growing, round of applause filled the cavernous hall. William strode onto the stage, beaming, pausing to wave grandly to the crowd. He looked over at Serafina, who blew him a subtle, possessive kiss. He was at the absolute zenith of his life, oblivious to the altitude sickness. Thank you, he began, his voice resonating with practiced, powerful confidence. Tonight, we are here to support the incredible work of the Starlight Foundation. But we are also here because we believe in the future. A future of connection, of innovation, a future powered by Vance Innovations. As he launched into his well-rehearsed, dynamic pitch, Era felt a low vibration from her phone. A simple text message from Liam landed. 20 minutes. A slow, genuine, terrifying smile touched Era's lips for the first time that night. The clock was about to strike midnight. And then the subtle unraveling began. It was almost imperceptible at first. A junior event coordinator scurried over to the gala's main organizer, whispering frantically into her earpiece. The organizer's face went instantly pale. She began speaking into her headset, her eyes darting nervously toward the main entrance doors. Then Arthur Harrison, the key investor William was trying desperately to land, discreetly pulled out his phone. His eyes widened slightly as he read an incoming message. He looked up at William on the stage, his expression souring dramatically from focused interest to immediate alarm. He tapped the shoulder of another potential investor, a man named Peterson, and showed him the screen. Peterson's jaw tightened. Within minutes, a silent viral panic began to spread through the room's most influential players. Phones were checked obsessively. Quiet, urgent conversations broke out. The atmosphere in the room shifted entirely, transitioning from celebratory exuberance to tense, anticipatory dread. William, blinded by the stage lights and his own boundless ego, didn't notice the tectonic shift. He was nearing his crescendo, his voice ringing with forced passion. And with a final round of Series B funding, which I'm thrilled to announce we are closing tonight, Vance Innovations will not just compete, it will dominate. He was met with a scattered, uncertain applause. The vital energy in the room had utterly evaporated. He looked genuinely confused, his confident smile faltering for the first time. He searched the crowd, his eyes finding Serafina. She gave him a questioning shrug, her own perfectly composed face showing a visible crack of confusion. It was then that the main, massive doors of Cipriani swung open, not with a crash or a flourish, but with a silent, heavy authority that seemed to physically suck the remaining air out of the room. All conversation ceased. Every head turned simultaneously to look. Framed in the grand archway were three men. They were not dressed for a gala. They were in dark, impeccably tailored business suits that seemed to absorb and consume the light around them. They moved not with the nervous swagger of new money, but with the unnerving, absolute stillness of unquestioned, ancient power. At the front was Alistair Blackwood. His hair was silver, nearly white. His face was etched with the lines of 100 successful boardroom battles, and his eyes, a piercing, cold shade of Arctic blue, swept across the room with an expression of profound, weary disappointment, as if surveying a trivial mess his child had made that he now reluctantly had to clean up. To his right was Marcus Blackwood, the current CEO of the multi-billion-dollar Blackwood Corporation. He was tall, imposingly broad-shouldered, severe, with a face that looked as if it were carved from granite. He held a tablet in his hand, and his expression was one of cold surgical fury. And to his left, looking utterly at home as he surveyed the chaos he was about to create, was Liam Blackwood. He caught eye across the room and gave her the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. The pack had arrived. They began to walk forward, their footsteps echoing with chilling clarity in the stunned, cavernous hall. A phalanx of their personal security detail, men built like battlements and dressed in immaculate black suits, immediately moved forward, their presence an unspoken threat. They efficiently cleaved a path through the now paralyzed throng of guests, who seemed incapable of movement. The whispers started tentative at first, then spreading like an electrical current, igniting into a roaring wildfire of hushed realization. My God, is that Alistair Blackwood, the patriarch? What is he doing here? He hasn't attended a public event in a decade. That's Marcus Blackwood, the financier. They say he doesn't just move markets. He can render entire national economies obsolete with a single dictated phone call. The Blackwoods here. William stood on the stage instantly and utterly paralyzed. His triumphant speech was forgotten. His moment of apotheosis curdled into ash in his mouth. He registered the three dark figures, then his eyes flickered to Lara in her corner, and for the first time, a terrifying, bone-deep sliver of comprehension finally broke through his arrogance. Serafina, too, was frozen mid-pose, the brittle shell of her socialite's poise shattering completely. She recognized these men not as mere billionaires, but as the true, ruthless gods of this world, beings from a financial stratosphere so far above her own she couldn't have even conceived of its existence. The three Blackwood men did not stop until they reached the foot of the stage, their collective, devastating gaze fixed solely on the man trapped under the glare of the spotlight. The petty king's reign was irrevocably over. His executioners had arrived. The silence in the grand hall of Cipriani was no longer just an absence of noise. It was a physical presence, heavy, suffocating, and charged with the crushing weight of inevitable fate. William Vance stood on the stage, bathed in a spotlight that now felt less like the halo of celebration and more like the harsh, unforgiving glare of an interrogation lamp. He looked down at the three men who had brought his glittering world to a screeching, definitive halt. His face a mask of disbelief rapidly morphing into dawning horror. Liam Blackwood, ever the master of ceremonies, polished, theatrical, and deadly, was the first to move. With an effortless, predatory grace, he stepped onto the stage, gently relieved the microphone from William's limp, useless hand, and addressed the spellbound audience. "Good evening," he said, his voice measured calm, yet carrying a resonance that reached the furthest, darkest corners of the room. It was the voice of a man accustomed to holding the complete and undivided attention of a courtroom, a boardroom, or a nation's fate. "Apologies for the interruption. My name is Liam Blackwood. My brother Marcus, my father Alistair, and I are here on a rather urgent family matter." He paused, deliberately allowing the immense, generational weight of his family's name to settle over the audience like a shroud. He then turned his gaze from the frozen crowd to William, offering a smile that played dangerously on his lips, a smile that held no warmth, only clinical contempt. "Mr. Vance, a very impressive speech, full of passion, full of ambition." Then, his eyes swept the room, finding Lara Alara in the distance. He extended a long, deliberate hand towards her. "But you seem to have forgotten to introduce the most important person in your life, your wife. He waited. Every single head in the room swiveled to follow his gaze, landing upon the quiet woman in the simple navy dress, who had been systematically rendered invisible all night. She rose from her chair, and with a deep, inherent poise she didn't know she possessed, she began to walk towards the stage. The crowd parted for her, physically recoiling to clear her path as if she were royalty. Liam's smile widened slightly as she approached the stage steps. "We're here for our sister," he announced, his voice ringing with startling, undeniable clarity. Alara Blackwood. The name hit the room not like a whisper, but like a physical blow, the shattering sound of glass breaking. A collective, audible gasp swept through the hall. Alara Blackwood. Not May, not some simple, easily discarded orphaned artist. The Blackwood, daughter of Alistair, sister to Marcus and Liam, and an heir to one of the most powerful and fiercely private family fortunes on the entire planet. William's face drained of every last vestige of color. It was the look of a man watching his own ghost rise, accusing, from the grave. He stumbled back a step, his mouth opening and closing uselessly, no sound capable of forming. Seraphina's reaction was even more dramatically pathetic. The smug, confident mask she wore, the one that had allowed her to openly mock Lara, cracked entirely and fell away, revealing a face contorted with raw, paralyzing panic and shock. The Cartier necklace suddenly seemed cheap, gaudy, and utterly foolish. She had openly mocked a Blackwood. The gravity of her miscalculation, the sheer, astronomical scale of her social error, was so immense it bordered on the comically tragic. Alara reached the stage. Liam took her hand, assisting her up the final step. She stood beside him, no longer a wilting flower, but a woman finally flanked by titans. She looked at William, her eyes clear and impossibly cold. There was no hatred in her gaze, only a profound, exhausted, and utterly final pity. Then Marcus stepped forward. He never bothered to climb the stage. He didn't need to elevate himself to look down upon William. His voice was low, devoid of human emotion, and utterly devastating in its precision. He looked up at William, tapping the screen of the tablet in his hand, a device that held William's annihilated future. "William Vance," Marcus began, his tone that of a CEO delivering a terminal quarterly report to a defunct subsidiary. "As of 10 minutes ago, your primary investor, the Sterling Hayes Fund, was acquired in a hostile takeover by a subsidiary of the Blackwood Corporation. Their first executive action was to call in their investment in Vance Innovations, effective immediately." William swayed violently on his feet. "No, you can't." "I can," Marcus continued, his voice cutting through William's pathetic protest like a surgical laser. "Furthermore, the second lien debt you took on to stay afloat last quarter? We bought that this morning. All of it. The bank that holds both your business and personal credit lines? My father has been on their board for 30 years. As of this moment, your company is insolvent. Your assets are frozen, and every line of credit you have has been revoked." He looked from the desolate William to the pale-faced Arthur Harrison and the other terrified investors in the audience. "For those of you considering investing in this venture," Marcus said, his lip curling in palpable distaste, "I would advise a thorough reevaluation. The Blackwood Corporation does not invest in failures, and we are very protective of our assets." The message was crystalline and terrifyingly clear. Vance Innovations was not just dead. It was financially and reputationally radioactive. The investors, including Mr. Harrison, began backing away physically, creating distance between themselves and William as if he were carrying a contagious plague. Finally, Alistair Blackwood, who had remained silent, an immense figure of stillness, took a single step forward. He was not loud like Liam or cold like Marcus. His power resided entirely in his terrifying stillness, in the immense, crushing weight of his presence. He looked only at his daughter, his eyes softening marginally. "Alara," he said, his voice filled with a quiet, paternal sorrow that resonated throughout the room. "Are you ready to come home?" Alara looked at the ruins of her husband on the stage, at the terrified, exposed face of his mistress in the crowd. She looked at the wreckage of the life she had tried to build, and she felt nothing, just a profound, cleansing sense of release. She nodded at her father. "Yes, Papa, I am." Alistair then lifted his gaze to William for the first and only time. He didn't need to say a single word. The look in his eyes contained entire volumes of contempt, condemnation, and absolute dismissal. In that single, withering glance, William Vance was not just bankrupted. He was erased. He was reduced from a promising tech CEO to a pathetic footnote in the story of a Blackwood's wrath. Liam put a protective arm around Alara's shoulders. "I believe we're done here," he said into the microphone before letting the device drop to the stage with a resounding, metallic thud that echoed the final nail being hammered into William Vance's coffin. As the Blackwood family turned to leave, a cordon of their private security materialized instantly, forming a seamless, impenetrable barrier around them. They moved through the stunned crowd with the calm deliberation of a royal procession departing a disaster zone. No one dared to speak to them. No one dared to meet their eyes. They were a force of nature, a hurricane of wealth and power that had just swept through, and the gala's attendees were merely mortals surveying the wreckage. William remained on the stage, a pathetic, rigid statue in the harsh glare of the spotlight. The life he had so carefully constructed, the future he had been so certain of, had been dismantled piece by devastating piece in less than 5 minutes. He was a king who had woken up to find his kingdom, his castle, and even the clothes on his back had been nothing more than a fragile dream. He finally collapsed, not onto a chair, but onto the stage floor itself, burying his head in his hands as dry, racking sobs of pure, agonizing despair shook his body. Meanwhile, Serafina was experiencing her own, distinct form of social demolition. As the initial shock wore off, the attendees, especially the predatory women she considered her rivals, began to look at her with a potent mixture of pity and unconcealed, malicious glee. Her currency in this world was entirely based on perception, the perception of power, of being on the winning team. She had recklessly hitched her wagon to William, believing him to be a rising star, and in doing so, had publicly and viciously insulted a woman who turned out to be the very sun itself. She tried desperately to salvage the situation, spotting Auden Sterling, the influential wife of a rival media CEO. She tried to approach her with a shaky, desperate smile. "Can you believe this drama, Auden? It's just ghastly." Auden Sterling, a woman who inherently understood which way the wind blew and the precise moment a ship sank, simply looked pointedly at Serafina's ill-fated Cartier necklace, then directly at her face, and gave her a smile that was pure acid. "Ghastly? I think it's the most riveting piece of theater I've seen all year. You were wonderfully cast as the court jester, Serafina." She then turned her back, a gesture of social execution so final that others nearby physically shied away from Serafina, as if proximity might make them contagious. Her powerful father, Robin Du Bois, would hear of this by morning. His daughter had not just made a fool of herself. She had made a powerful, implacable enemy in the Blackwoods. The fallout for his own sprawling media empire could be catastrophic. In her desperate, blind social climbing, Serafina had inadvertently started a war she could not possibly win. Her phone began to buzz insistently with message after message, but she didn't need to look. She knew they were from her furious father. Her charmed life, built on borrowed luster and cruelty, was irrevocably over. As Alara walked towards the grand exit, flanked by the immense, comforting presence of her father and brothers, she felt a profound sense of dislocation. The opulent ballroom, which had seemed so intimidating and vast just hours before, now looked small, tawdry, and faintly ridiculous. The powerful people she had been so afraid of now seemed like frightened, pale children. She hadn't realized the true scale of the world she had been born into, or the power she had so casually set aside for a quiet life that turned out to be a suffocating lie. Just before they reached the massive doors, she stopped and looked back one last time. She saw William, a broken man, being helped off the stage by a bewildered event staffer. She saw Serafina standing utterly alone in her crimson dress, a pariah in the world she had tried so desperately to conquer. There was no triumph in Alara's heart, no sweet taste of revenge. There was only a vast, aching sadness for the woman she had been, the trusting, hopeful artist who had believed in a simple love. That woman, she knew, had died on the balcony tonight. But as her father gently placed his hand on her shoulder, guiding her out into the cool, dark New York night where a fleet of custom black cars waited, she knew that in the deceased woman's place, someone new was being born. Someone stronger, harder, and someone who would never again forget the name she carried. Outside, the air was clean and cold, smelling faintly of rain and possibility. Liam opened the door to the lead car, a custom Rolls-Royce Phantom, its interior rich with dark leather. "We're going to the tower?" he asked gently, already knowing the answer. She looked at the glittering, arrogant skyline of the city, a city that now felt like it belonged to her again, not just William's ambition. "Home," she said, her voice clear, steady, and entirely free of doubt. The Blackwood Tower. It wasn't a request. It was a statement. She was no longer hiding in a cramped Brooklyn brownstone. She was Alara Blackwood, and she was going home to claim her space. The life of Mrs. Vance was over. The real work, the work of rebuilding herself, was just beginning. The weeks that followed the Starlight Gala were not dramatic in the public eye, but rather a quiet storm of legal and financial maneuvering, orchestrated with brutal, cold efficiency by Marcus and Liam. William Vance ceased to exist in any meaningful public way. His company was swiftly absorbed by a Blackwood subsidiary, its valuable intellectual assets stripped and repurposed, its name erased from the industry records. He was forced into personal bankruptcy. The Brooklyn brownstone was sold to cover a fraction of his staggering debts. Rumors swirled that he was last seen working a menial logistics job in a warehouse in New Jersey, a bitter ghost haunted by the opulent life he'd almost had. Serafina Dubois fared no better. Her father, in a desperate, frantic act of damage control, sent her on an indefinite wellness retreat to a secluded, high-security facility in Switzerland. Her social media went dark. Her name was immediately scrubbed from every serious event list, and the vibrant, cruel socialite became a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. She had flown too close to the sun and had been incinerated by its gravitational fire. But Alara was not interested in their fates. She had no time to spare for the ghosts of her past. She was too busy rediscovering herself. Living in the immense penthouse of the Blackwood Tower, a sky-high sanctuary of glass and steel overlooking Central Park, she felt the suffocating fog that had clouded her life for 5 years begin, finally, to lift. In the beginning, her father and brothers were fiercely protective, treating her as if she were a fragile piece of porcelain that had been shattered. But they quickly realized she wasn't broken. She was merely dormant. One morning, Alistair entered her private studio, a vast, light-filled space she hadn't used seriously since her art school days. He found her, not with gentle watercolors, but surrounded by massive, daunting canvases. Her hands and expensive clothes were smeared with thick, vibrant oil paints. The gentle, introspective landscapes were gone. In their place were bold, abstract expressions of fury, sorrow, and ultimately, a fierce, defiant joy. The colors were loud, aggressive, and uncompromising. It was the work of a woman who was finally, forcefully allowing herself to take up emotional and physical space. "This is powerful, Alara," Alistair said, his voice thick with a mixture of pride and emotion, as he looked at a canvas dominated by a visceral slash of crimson against a stormy backdrop of deep, turbulent blues. "I spent 5 years painting in pastels to keep the peace," she replied, not taking her focused eyes off her work. "I'm done with pastels." With the full, unlimited backing of the Blackwood Foundation, she began planning her first solo exhibition. She didn't want a soft launch in a small, polite gallery. She wanted to make a statement, a public declaration of war against her own history. Liam secured the entire ground floor of the MoMA for a one-night-only event. The art world was immediately abuzz. Who was this Alara Blackwood? This unknown artist suddenly appearing with the backing of one of the world's most powerful, intensely private families? The night of the exhibition was nothing short of a coronation. The space was filled not with the superficial socialites and hollow investors of the Starlight Gala, but with serious, discerning art critics, influential collectors, and fellow artists. Alara, dressed in a striking architectural gown of deep indigo, moved through the room with a quiet, inherent confidence that was far more commanding than Seraphina's loudest bravado had ever been. She was not Mrs. Vance, the supportive wife. She was not Alara Blackwood, the reclusive heir. She was simply, undeniably, the artist. Her work was a critical sensation. The New York Times Review published the next morning called her a vital, explosive new voice, her work a searing testament to the ferocious power of personal rebirth. Every single piece sold before the night was over, with the substantial proceeds going to a charity she had swiftly established to support female artists struggling to make their independent mark. Late that night, after the last guest had departed, Alara stood alone in the center of the vast gallery, surrounded only by the echoes of her triumphant work. Her brother Liam came to stand quietly beside her. "You did it, Ellie," he said softly, looking around the space. "You built something real from the rubble." "They thought my name was my power," she said, looking at the bold, unapologetic signature on her favorite piece. "They never understood. The name just opens the doors. It's what you do when you walk through them that matters." She had walked through a door of pain and humiliation and had emerged into a gallery filled with light, color, and her own undeniable strength. The story of the crying wife at the gala would fade into mere gossip. But the story of Alara, the artist, was just beginning. She had finally learned the lesson her father had tried to teach her all those years ago. She had remembered who she was, and she would never let anyone else name her again. 6 months after the MoMA exhibition, the name Blackwood was synonymous with artistic fire. Her work was the essential, unavoidable topic of the art world. Her story, a modern myth, was whispered from Manhattan penthouses to the seaside palaces of Monaco. She had, by all objective accounts, won. The ashes of her old life had given rise to a phoenix, vibrant and soaring. Yet, as she sat sketching quietly on a bench in the conservatory garden of Central Park, she felt the familiar, subtle weight of a cage, one not made of steel, but of solid, burnished gold. Her anonymity was gone, a casualty of her spectacular vindication. In her previous life as Lara Vance, she could sit for hours observing the delicate play of light on a flower petal, utterly invisible to the world. Now she was a landmark. Tourists would lower their voices as they passed, their phone cameras angled discreetly in her direction. "That's her," they'd murmur. "The artist, the Blackwood." The two titles had become inseparable, fused together by the intense heat of that night at the gala. She had wanted her work to speak for itself, but it was always introduced by the echoing thunder of her family's power. She was no longer William's forgotten wife, but she feared she was becoming something else entirely. Her family's most interesting, most beautiful asset. The feeling crystallized during a meeting at the prestigious Guggenheim Foundation. They had invited her to join their acquisitions board, an honor she had once dreamed of achieving purely on merit. She had arrived prepared with pages of notes on emerging artists whose work she admired, artists who were bold, unconventional, and struggling. But the meeting wasn't about art. "Alara, your presence on this board is a game-changer." The chairman, a portly man named Mr. Davenport, had boomed, his smile unpleasantly obsequious. "With the Blackwood name attached to our spring fundraiser, we can finally secure the Rothko wing." Another board member eagerly chimed in. "Exactly. Your brother Marcus Corporation has interests in tech. Perhaps you could persuade him that a digital art initiative would be a worthy investment." Alara sat in stunned silence, her carefully prepared notes feeling foolishly naive in her hands. They didn't want her eye. They wanted her name. They didn't want her vision. They wanted her connections. She was a key, not a connoisseur. The power she had called upon to save herself now cast a gilded, inescapable shadow over everything she touched, threatening to eclipse the very talent she had fought so hard to reclaim. Was this all her victory had earned her? A promotion from a man's accessory to a family's emblem. The quiet watercolor was now a recognizable brand logo. That evening, She found her brother Marcus in the penthouse library, a cavernous room scented with dark wood and old leather. He was reviewing complex financial reports on a glowing tablet, the cold, hard logic of the numbers reflecting the way he governed their empire. "Marcus, we need to talk," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He looked up, his expression meticulously neutral. "Is everything all right?" "That night at the gala," she began, choosing her words with careful precision. "I will always be grateful. You, Liam, and Papa. You saved me. We protected our own," he stated, as if reciting a simple law of physics. "It is what we do. But the way you did it," she pressed on, pacing in front of the towering fireplace. "The demolition. You didn't just end my marriage. You annihilated a man's entire existence. You used a weapon of mass destruction to solve what was essentially a domestic dispute." Marcus set his tablet down, giving her his full, unnerving attention. He humiliated a Blackwood in public. He was building his company on your emotional and financial support while planning to discard you like trash. It was not a domestic dispute, Elara. It was an attack on this family. We responded in proportion to the insult, not the man. "But don't you see the consequences for me?" she asked, her voice rising with a passion that suggested they were circling the one place he couldn't follow. "Surprised them both. You didn't just showcase our power, you indelibly branded me with it. When people look at me now, they don't see an artist wrestling with the complexities of her craft. They see the woman whose name is synonymous with seismic, world-altering influence, the woman whose family can crush careers and ruin lives with a single, untraceable phone call. This visibility, this enforced notoriety, has suffocated the very air I need to breathe. My success feels irrevocably tainted, steeped in suspicion. Did the esteemed Times critic truly connect with the despair and resurrection painted onto my canvas? Or was his praise merely an act of professional self-preservation, terrified of offending a Leicester Blackwood's fiercely protected daughter? Did those private collectors bid frantically for my abstract work? Or were they just purchasing a perceived proximity to true, untouchable power? Her voice fractured, a sharp, audible break on that last, desperate question. "You saved me from the tangible threat of William. But did you ever pause to consider that, in doing so, you might be trapping me in a prison of a different sort? A velvet cage woven from the very fibers of this name. Feels heavier, more suffocating, than it ever has before." Marcus remained motionless for a long, clinical moment. His gaze was intensely analytical, settling upon Elara as if she were a complex, almost troublesome variable in an otherwise perfect algebraic equation. "I see," he stated finally. His tone was not unkind, it lacked malice entirely, but it was utterly devoid of human sentiment. "You are confusing the tool with the outcome. Our name, our power. It is nothing more than an instrument, a utility. It exists to serve a purpose. It can be a shield, as it was for you that devastating night, or it can be a battering ram, as it was for your husband. That it also functions as a harsh, inescapable spotlight is merely an inconvenient side effect, Elara. The world we inhabit is not some pristine gallery where things are judged on pure, isolated merit. It is a battlefield." He paused, his focus tightening. "You were gravely wounded, and we eliminated the threat decisively." He rose slowly from his leather chair and walked deliberately over to the floor-to-ceiling window, gazing down at the indifferent, glittering tapestry of the city lights below. "You ask if there was another, quieter way. Perhaps a discreet divorce, a mediated settlement," he continued, his voice echoing slightly in the vast room. "And you would have been known forever as the poor, tragic artist, the publicly betrayed victim who was cheated upon while the world watched. He would have eventually succeeded on his own merits with his new wife, fading back into respectable society, and you would have been a disposable footnote, a melancholic backstory easily forgotten. We gave you a different story entirely, a narrative arc defined by strength and vengeance, not by lingering victimhood." He turned back, silhouetted against the urban expanse. "Yes, the name is inextricably woven into that new story. Now, it is your birthright. To resent it, to try and shed its influence, is fundamentally to resent the very shield that keeps you safe and grants you the platform you now enjoy. He fixed her with a penetrating stare. The fundamental question is not what the name does to you, Elara. The question is what you will do with the name. His words, cold and profoundly pragmatic as they were, pierced the fog of her self-pity and struck a foundational chord deep within her. He was absolutely right. She had been so consumed by the shadow her name cast, the darkness and suspicion it trailed, that she had completely forgotten she was the one controlling the light source. She could continue to remain a passive emblem, a tool for others to manipulate, or she could choose to wield her formidable influence with the same ruthless intention and precision she applied when placing a single, calculated brush stroke on a pristine canvas. The following week, Elara returned to the hallowed, intimidating confines of the Guggenheim boardroom. She accepted the position. Mr. Davenport, the Foundation's oldest trustee, began to clap enthusiastically, his face alight with monetary relief, but Elara simply held up a silencing hand, her small, decisive gesture immediately quieting the entire room. I am accepting this position as an artist first, not merely as a high society fundraiser or token celebrity, she stated, her voice steady, resonating with a newfound, steely authority that surprised even her. My focus will be on the art, the critical mission of this institution, and only the art. And my first proposal, effective immediately, is this. The Blackwood Foundation will endow a new biannual prize, the Emergence Prize. It will be the single largest grant for an undiscovered artist in the world. A palpable murmur of excitement rippled through the room. The trustees were already mentally calculating the philanthropic prestige. However, Elara continued, her eyes meeting the gaze of every powerful person at the table, ensuring they understood the gravity of her intent. It will have one non-negotiable condition, she declared. The judging will be completely, irrevocably blind. The selection committee will see only the art itself, no names, no accompanying biographies, no mention of gallery representation or private connections. This prize will be awarded on merit, and merit alone. A deep, expectant silence fell over the mahogany table. I want to find the artists who have no powerful family to open gilded doors for them, she finished, her voice softening slightly, imbued now with a mission. I want to find the raw, screaming talent that is waiting patiently to be heard from the quietest, most marginalized rooms. She had taken their corporate avarice and their expectation of elite maneuvering and transformed it instantly into an act of pure, revolutionary artistic integrity. She was not rejecting her power, she realized. She was strategically refining it. She was using the Blackwood sledgehammer not to smash her enemies, but to crack open a door for someone else who deserved a chance. In that precise, illuminating moment, she finally understood that her name was not a shadow to hide within, nor was it merely a brand to endure. It was a profound, weighty responsibility. William Vance and Serafina had seen power as a reckless weapon to procure personal gain. Her family saw it primarily as an impenetrable shield for self-preservation and dynasty building. She, however, would make it a lantern, a tool to illuminate the difficult, unpaved paths of those who, like the woman she once was, were still trying to find their way out of the suffocating dark. She was Elara Blackwood, the artist, and she was finally ready to paint her own enduring masterpiece, not on canvas, but on the world itself. In the end, this was not simply a story about vengeance exacted. It was an arduous journey toward the rediscovery of identity. Elara's greatest victory was not the resounding downfall of her tormentors, but the hard-won clarity of her own voice. She had to lose the name Vance, the definition of her relationship, to truly become Elara. A soft pause, and a slight clearing of the throat, as the narrator continues. So often in life, we unconsciously allow ourselves to be defined by our relationships, our corporate titles, or the quiet, relentless sacrifices we make, inadvertently dimming our own internal light for the comfort or convenience of others. But true, transformative power lies dormant within us, coiled and waiting for a reason strong enough to awaken. Elara's story serves as a powerful, necessary reminder that sometimes, Hitting absolute rock bottom is the only way to build a foundation strong enough to hold up the masterpiece you were always meant to be. If this story of resilience, creative reclamation, and vindication resonated deeply with you, and if you believe in the power of seizing and reshaping your own narrative, please show your support by hitting that like button below. Share this video with someone you know who might desperately need a reminder of their own inner, untapped strength, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that inspire and empower. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an update on our journey. Thank you for listening.